Oh, hi, everybody. Didn't see you come in. Thanks for dropping by. It's me, James, and you're on the Oracles. And today we're going to be talking about UFOs, or what the American government now calls unidentified flying phenomena, or UAPs, which I think is rather, I don't know, I still call them UFOs. They're unidentified, they're flying, and they're objects. But phenomena, I guess, sounds interesting, and they're still unidentified, and they're in the air. But a lot of them aren't, or they're transitioning between air and water. So what's that about? They're just, oh yeah, and I guess there's a term for unidentified underwater phenomena, UUPs. Unidentified floating objects or sinking objects or flying objects. And today we're going to discuss that transition between sky and earth and water, and what that could really be. My guest, Paul Ascough, who has been kind of investigating and snooping around UFOs for about the last 50 years, British military. Then he was in what we would call like the reserve, or what the U.S. may call the National Guard. It was that branch of the military, and he was a paramedic. And all this time, he had been having experiences. He'd seen UFOs and kept an eye out. And then wanted, obviously, when we do have an experience, we want to talk to somebody else who has had a similar experience. So that was what he has been kind of up to now that he's retired. He's put a book together, and it's called UFOs, The Real Story. And of course, it's a real story based on his experience and who he's talked to, and throws out a couple of hypotheses. And, you can going back in time, not that long ago, but we talk about the extraterrestrial hypotheses versus the interdimensional hypotheses. And if John Keel was around, the late John Keel, who wrote a book on that difference and how he came up with thinking that it wasn't more of an extraterrestrial versus the multidimensional things that we were seeing. We don't get really heavily into that, but we do get into an idea that Paul puts forward, that it's intervibrational. And I should say intervibrational, but it's based on vibrations. And that's why, part of the reason, I should say, would be part of the reasons why sometimes we just don't grab a camera and point it at whatever we see. We get lucky to get photographs, and we're getting a lot more nowadays. And is it something that it's that fight or flight that kicks in? You see a Bigfoot and you've got a bunch of camera gear and you just freeze. It looks at you, absolutely terrifies you down to that monkey brain, into your DNA, that this is something really scary. And you freeze, and it takes off in the woods or flies away, and you thinking, wow, I should have had my camera out. I should have done that. But I was so scared I could not move. Is that caused by them? Is that a vibrational thing that they do to you? They being these things that come in and move within our atmosphere, what we perceive our atmosphere is, air, water, land, things that are tangible to us as human beings, living in the vibration that we live in. You look at some of the photography that's come out lately. That one, it hasn't been out for too long now. Jeremy Corbell, who is a documentarian out of Los Angeles. I met him a couple of times. I like Jeremy because he just asks questions. He wants to know things. He drills down and tries to get some semblance of an understanding of what people have experienced. You may know Jeremy as the fellow. He put I think the original Skinwalker Ranch documentary, along with the Bob Lazar documentary. You can find, could even be out on YouTube now. It's just on Netflix for sure. But he asks questions that I think we all want to ask, which makes him kind of fun to watch his stuff. Again, Jeremy Corbell is getting a bunch of information given to him through the military. I shouldn't say through the military, by people in the military, because they trust him as a pretty decent source. He's not an expert per se in UFOs, because I don't really think there are experts in the paranormal or in UFOs at this point. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. There probably are experts in unidentified flying objects, and most of those people are, they work on them or they fly on them. So there's people who do that. Jeremy's is a documentarian. He's a reporter, and he is digging into this phenomena, which is kind of cool. Paul Ascough, our author of UFOs, The Real Story, he has his opinion, and it's kind of interesting. It goes into the transdimensional, the multidimensional hypothesis a bit. Is it the vibration? I talk about vibration. He talks about frequency. I think it's semantics. It's the same thing to me anyway. It's talking about our vibrations. Some people say, if you're a human being, if you're one of us and you have a higher vibration, you may see more ghosts than somebody who has a lower vibration. Again, lower vibration people aren't bad. It's not a bad thing. Higher vibration is not a good thing. It's just something we are. We all have a different vibration, and they fluctuate on our day-to-day life. But those with the higher vibration are said to see more, like they'll see a ghost. Is that because our vibration is at a point where it allows us to see that? Are those people the same kind of people who maybe they're the only ones who see UFOs? I have friends who see UFOs all the time. I don't. I mean, they see the big triangle ones come up over top of mountains and then they disappear. And her husband was standing right beside her. They both looked up, saw this thing, gone. Nobody else saw it. A girl on my paranormal team, I think it was her daughter's birthday party when they're like 2 or 3 years old. And all the other kids were in the backyard, and she's walking out of the kitchen and looked up, and there's this big silent V UFO coming over top of her neighborhood. And she was the only one who noticed it. All the other mums that were there with the kids, looking around, nobody else saw it. But she saw it. So what is it that some people are permitted to see these things and some people aren't? Again, it's like Bigfoot. Some people see them, some people don't. Some people see a Bigfoot disappear behind a tree, and they run up behind the tree and it's gone. Where does it go? Do UFOs, do these vehicles that people are seeing, do they exist in a dimension right beside ours, and they kind of drift every so often into ours? And then they drift back into theirs? Is that where gnomes and elves and fairies come from? Do they kind of flit back and forth? Elemental beings that people have seen over the centuries, the centaurs and whatever else, different beings moving back and forth. And of course, there's the people who talk about the species of ETs, and these come from this star system, and this one comes from this star system. Yeah, they maybe do come from there, but do they travel interdimensionally to get here? Inconceivable. And is it really traveling, or they just kind of show up because it's an energy thing? I don't know. Is it conceivable? I think it is. But then again, I'm kind of open-minded about all this stuff. Paul Ascough, very interesting fellow, says that he believes that it could be quite plausible that as human beings, we have built in a survival instinct, that our own frequency can pick up an alien frequency and then recognizes it as something, again, deep monkey brain level that we're not supposed to be near or see. So it shuts that stuff down. We talk a bit about that. It's interesting. It's interesting in his life experience as kind of a higher vibration guy himself, possibly is the reason why he actually has had experiences where he had seen them. And in his book, he attempts to make sense of all these little mysteries, from aliens to Bigfoot to Bigfoot to ghosts. And lets his imagination kind of run with it. So it's a very, very interesting book. Again, it's UFOs, The Real Story. And you can Google that, go online, find it at the Amazon, and have the Amazons bring it to your house in a couple of days. And we talk about, I think we mentioned a couple of the videos that come up. Again, I kind of get sidetracked there, but Jeremy Corbell, his video that you've probably all seen now, came out not too long ago. And when I mean long ago, it's in May, it came, end of April, early May. And again, if you go to @Jeremy Corbell on Twitter, or probably even on Instagram, or just Google Jeremy Corbell UFO, you'll hook up with Jeremy and you can see all sorts of work that he does. It's he's got a good compilation of all the UFO releases that are coming out. And people trust him enough in the military to leak stuff to him. So you might see it first if you follow Jeremy around. Jeremy's latest video that he's popped out is a U.S. military video of a round object, a dark object over a darker ocean. So they've got their thermal imager, what I call FLIR, forward-looking infrared. Some people call it FLIR or FLIR because it's harder to say. But it's but forward-looking infrared is what FLIR stands for. But you've got this dark image, which is probably because it's cooler than the background image of the a night sky, some thermal loading in the sky, and then a darker ocean. So it's a cooler image, and it kind of hovers over the ocean, flits back and forth a bit, drops down, and then poof, into the ocean. I shouldn't say boof because it actually doesn't make a great splash. There's no indication of a splashing is coming up, which is of interest to what we're talking about. Just like the UFO military video from Puerto Rico a few years back, and look at it here. You've got this object flying. I think they pick it up. The aircraft is up about 2,300 feet. This object is, when they pick it up, it's about 280 feet off the ground. And it's flying continually lower over a town, eventually over a road, and then down low into gets into the water. But you'll see when it flies over the road, you get an idea of the size of it. It's about half the size of a car. And then it's at a constant speed. It gets to the ocean. It drops down to 0 feet, and then boom, into the ocean. Boom being just a term because it doesn't make a splash. You do not see the thermal imager pick up any disturbance in the ocean, and you can actually see it through. It's traveling shallow, so you still see it underwater, and then eventually you lose sight of it, and it comes up again into two pieces, and the furthest piece eventually kind of banks off to the right and disappears, and then the other object continues on. So it's split into two after coming up out of the water. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't decrease in the speed. And we all know from jumping in a swimming pool or throwing rocks in a pool, you go from air to water, there's going to be resistance, and you're going to have a change in velocity. Well, there's no change in velocity. There's no splash. So how does that work? Those of you who studied physics at a far greater level than I did, how would that work? No splash? How? Interesting. But those are the couple of the videos I pulled up that I've just shown you, and it's something to ponder. And right now I'm going to go get Liam, who's our little alien friend, who will introduce the show. And after that, I'm bringing you Paul Ascough, and we're going to talk about his book, UFOs, The Real Story.
I see. You found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, Here are the oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam. And thank you, listener/viewer, tuning into today's episode of The Oracles. It's me, James, and with me is Paul Ascough. Paul, how are you today?
I'm excellent. Thank you, James. Nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, and just so my listener knows, the accent is real because you actually are speaking to me from the UK.
Yes, I'm a Yorkshireman from England.
Excellent. And here on the lower left Canadian coast, we say hello and welcome. Yeah, a little bit of a time difference, but not too crazy. But we'll work on through that. Now, you've been doing this UFO thing for quite a while, and it's culminated. Well, is the UFOs a real story? Is that your first book?
Yeah, it's sort of, shall I say, it's metamorphosized over the last 50 years. And it's through my, dare I say, experiences on the paranormal and with UFOs that people tend to do. I'll just go away a little bit, James. Well, people tend to do pieces of the pie. And for me, you'll get people that will do, from your side of the pond, they'll do Roswell. From my side of the pond, they'll do Rendlesham Forest. Or they'll do Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson and the Pascagoula incident. And people tend to just do these little pieces. And it's the same with the paranormal phenomenon. And people very seldom look at the whole picture. They just do a piece of the pizza rather than looking at the whole thing. And I believe they are all joined together. And there's a way to connect to it.
Well, I got your name through Philip Mantle, a mutual friend of ours, and in really respect his work in ufology. Again, another gentleman out in the UK. And he was saying that you have an interesting connecting kind of strand through all this, and it's more of an interdimensional and almost electromagnetic. It is, yeah. Yeah, it's a connection that way, as opposed to where you just assume when you look at something as a big chunk of some kind of space age metal flying through the sky. You've actually opened that other side up where are they actually coming from somewhere else, or are we sharing the same space sort of thing? Yeah. Is that from just your experiences over time, or did you have that aha moment at one point?
Well, would you like me to start at the beginning?
Start at the beginning, go to the end, and then stop, as Lewis Carroll said.
Oh, we could be here all night, but I'll start at the beginning. When I was 10 years old, we moved into a new home on the edge of a village, which was very quiet, very rural, and literally from our home, you were straight out into fields for miles and miles. And I'm talking 1968, so there was no light pollution. There was not the amount of aircraft there are now. It was very country. So my father ruled with a rod of iron. We had the old Victorian upbringing. And my brother and I, our last job of the day was to take our dog and the neighbour's dog. We had an army veteran next door who only had one lung, and so we had to take his dog for a walk too. So we come back in. This is about, I think, the end of August, beginning of September 1968. We'd taken the dogs for a walk, came back, and our normal routine was we'd bring the dogs, put them away, say goodnight to our parents, and go get ready and get into bed. That was the routine. So my brother and I had put the dogs away, and my father was in the front garden. Now, our home there looked due east over the fields, pretty flat terrain, and you could see a long way. So he's in the front garden. We go out to say goodnight, and it's just getting dusk. A nice, balmy, early September summer's night. And to the north, we were looking due east. To the north was thick cloud, which finished in a bank of cloud, a straight edge almost, that went away from us into the distance. But to the south, the sky was completely clear. Now, my father had a telescope, not that he was an astronomer or anything, but he had an interest. So he used to like to involve us. So no light pollution in those days, and the major constellations are starting to come out in the southern sky. So he's just pointing up in the sky. And as he did, and the three of us are looking, 2 UFOs came zooming out of the cloud really fast and then just stopped dead. And I immediately got a thought in my head, like somebody quite clearly talking in my head, and I'd say it was a male voice that say it was more or less like, oops, we hadn't meant to have been seen. You know, we should have stayed in the cloud sort of thing. And I got that quite clearly in my head. And they were stationary for about only a few seconds, and they were perfectly round, this pearly white, brilliant light. You could actually see the light from them shining on the edge of the bank of cloud. There was nothing apparently joining them together. One was slightly to one side and slightly behind the other. Perfectly spherical and still. No apparent rotation, no strobe lighting, no anything like that. Nothing apparently joining them, no appendages, just 2 brilliant lights. And then they set off again. And this time again, no acceleration, just immediately moving very fast away from us until they disappeared in the distance. And we probably only had them in sight for a minute and a half until they'd gone completely out of sight. Now, the 3 of us were sat there, mouths agape, like you would, until they'd gone out of sight. And the one thing else that I noticed was when they moved, they had the very smallest teardrop shape at the back, like they'd got a corona or an atmosphere around them that just made this little teardrop shape as they moved. And they moved quickly away from us until they disappeared into the distance. Completely silent throughout, apart from the voice in my head. And the 3 of us were absolutely silent. And my father, who had done his national service in our Royal Air Force after the war, he did 3 years, and he was the first to speak, and he just said, well, there's nothing that we've got that can do that. Well, there still isn't, that we know of anyway. But from that moment on, I was hooked. I wanted to know the nuts and bolts. How can something move like that from the physics point of view? And how come I don't know about it? Why isn't it on the news? Why isn't it in the newspapers? Why aren't people talking about it when they're blatantly there for everybody to see? So that was a life-changing moment because it was so bizarre, so odd, so alien, for want of a better term. And one thing that I do say was, when I've investigated a lot of these things in the past, the experiences or witnesses that you speak to, the first thing they'll say is, it was obvious it was something alien. It wasn't normal. It wasn't, it wasn't flares from a military exercise. It wasn't the oil rigs out at sea. It wasn't the lighthouse shining through the trees. It was odd. It was bizarre, and that is one thing that comes across. And I think as investigators, and there are some fantastic people that do a lot of research, and that is one thing that they do come across. These people, although the human psyche does try to rationalize things, I believe that people do generally tell the truth. They are trying to tell you as best they can, real life, what happened in the best terms they can. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. One of the things that, again, it tweaked my interest is when you said you had a thought, it just popped into your mind. Over the years of paranormal / UFO investigation, do you find that you get that often?
Yes.
And what do you believe that is?
Right. If you imagine, I'll move on to the electromagnetic spectrum, if I may.
Oh, yeah. Let's continue on, and I'll just keep writing questions.
Yeah, because that's fine. But it's because that really is the crux of the matter. If you imagine now, we use and live a day-to-day experience our ordinary matter around us and the energy that we deal with. And on a day-to-day basis, you start off that we're aware of. There's the radio waves we're using now at the top end, and then you come down through the infrared to the visible spectrum and acoustic spectrum that we see and hear. And then it goes down through the ultraviolet, X-rays, and then gamma rays at the lower end. Now, that's just what we use on a day-to-day basis in our normal lives. But out of that we use, the actual visible, what we see and hear, is less than 1/10 of 1% of our normal electromagnetic spectrum that we know about, right? So just hold that thought for a minute, less than 1/10 of 1%. The cosmologists and, what can I say, the people with much better brains than I, they're now banding figures about of 75 to even 95% of energy in the universe is dark energy and dark matter that we're only just coming to terms with. And if they're correct, which I believe they are, that's 95% that we don't even know about, and we're only seeing 1/10 of 1% of the 5%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's big figures to take in, but that's how it is. And the way that I describe it in the book, to put an analogy to it that people can relate to, because one thing I don't want to do and one thing I've tried to avoid is using overly scientific terms, because people pick up a book and if they start struggling, it's like, forget it, I'll put that to one side, until I'm in a better frame of mind. And I believe, and what I've tried to do, is that you shouldn't try to alienate people. You should try to make it on a level so that the normal layman can pick it up and understand it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've tried to do. So the analogy that I use is, you imagine the 5% that we use of our ordinary matter on a day-to-day basis is an old vinyl LP, right? Yeah. So we are living on that vinyl LP, and that's what we react to. Now, the dark energy and the dark matter, there isn't just our LP, there's a whole stack of them, because you have that much more energy in the universe that's on a different level to us, that's on a different plane to us, but around us all the time. And that is trying to get that over to people. So that's there. So you've got maybe I won't say ET, we'll just start with spirit and paranormal, cryptids, that sort of thing, your Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and they're all on a record that's very close to ours. So occasionally you get these places like, we'll use Skinwalker Ranch as a good example, where the records, the LPs are very close together, and people can, and in the right place at the right time, they will see something from that other dimension, if you like. Okay. Now, to move on from that, ET, I'll just say ET for now, because then people know what I'm talking about. ET, I believe there are many different races, and they're all at different levels of development. But they're much higher in the frequency range, and on much higher stack of the LPs, they're much higher up than we are. The difference is we only, as far as we know, we only use the 5% of our ordinary matter that we're aware of. And ET, as I'm generalizing, are able to use and manipulate and understand and control the whole of the magnetic spectrum, including the dark energy and dark matter. And that is why they move like they do. They're around us all the time, but we can't see them, as is spirit. They're around, but we don't see it. And again, the problem that we have as investigators, whether it's UFO or paranormal, is at the moment, we currently don't have any proof, because we currently can't measure anything beyond our normal 5%. Does that make sense?
It does. And as a paranormal investigator and somebody who's a little on the woo-woo metaphysical side of things, we talk about the ghosts being on the other side of the veil.
Yeah. Because
they're just on the other side. And what you're saying is, that's just the other side. That's the other LP. And we talk about our spirit guides being a very high vibration and we being of lower vibration and having to raise our vibration to communicate with them, and they have to drop theirs to communicate with us. And still, it's all, again, dimensional. In different
and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And if you imagine, I mean, look how far we've just come in the last 100 years. 100 years ago where you were lucky if you had a horse. There was certainly no internet. There was no telephone. There was no, if you were lucky, you had a stagecoach or the new railroad. And that was it. And look at the advances and how far we've come that we're able to have this conversation. We've got cars in our garage. We can go on aircraft. There's the internet. Anything we want to know, you can just, and you know, in fact, within 5 minutes. None of that was available then. So that's just in 100 years and the advances in medicine and technology and everything else. Imagine a race that could be 1,000 years in front of us, or even 10,000. And that is why we don't understand how they can move and communicate and how they interact with us. And it's all because of their complete control, manipulation, and understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum that at the moment we're only scratching the surface of.
No, I agree. We are right now like probably not even as advanced as those tribes in Papua New Guinea who saw airplanes for the first time in the 1930s and thought they were gods.
Yeah, exactly.
It's to drop a civilization that advanced into one that isn't. And then being human, we always have to come up with an excuse or a reason, and we have to find a reason for it. So if we can't see one in front of us, we'll build one based on the knowledge we have at that point. So we'll make up all sorts of crap to explain what we've just seen. But it's only based on our knowledge and our science of the day at the point we've seen that. Yeah.
So to move on, James, I that's how I got into UFOs. I was just 11 years old. I just had my 11th birthday, and then that was it. I wanted to know. But as you know, back in the day then, there weren't that many UFO books, and there weren't that many libraries or bookstores that even stocked them. So I had to get on my local bus service or railroad and go to the big cities to even find a bookstore or a library that would, if they didn't have something you wanted, they could order it for you, you know. And it was a nightmare then. You would spend hours going backwards and forwards just to read something, you know. Go on.
No, I was just saying, I interviewed Chariots of the Gods fellow. Oh, lost his name now. Anyway, it'd come on me. Eric von Daniken. And his book is a combination of a whole bunch of books he had to go find.
Yeah.
And of course, pulling pieces out of history books and the Bible and things like that. And it's and he's, that's 50 years ago, 52 years ago, I think he started.
Yeah.
And he's written a book on UFOs every year, but you know what? He's never seen a UFO.
Yeah, well, people don't. And I say it does make a big difference, because when there's one of my colleagues at work always wanted to see one. And his name's Liam, he's from the north. And I said, Liam, when you see something, you will know straight away in your head. You'll know it's not just a helicopter or an aeroplane or flares or something odd, you will know it's something alien. You get that feeling, So,
your book, UFOs, The Real Story, is it, and unfortunately I don't have it, so I don't know, it does it have a number of the stories of not only your experiences, but some other people you have talked to?
Sure. It has a lot of my experiences in it, but I'll recite one that was quite odd. I was with BUFORA for a few years, many years, and for a few years I was an investigator for them and did various cases. And at the time, Philip Mantle was the director of investigation, of the investigators. So now, fortunately, he didn't live that far away, just 20 minutes, something like that. So I used to go over and we'd have a cup of tea and we'd talk things over. And one day I'm reciting to him a sighting that I had with my first wife. And we lived nearer the east coast of England. And one night, my wife, we had a huge dog, a Pyrenean mountain dog.
Yeah.
And I knew that the dog wanted brushing, and I was going to take him for a walk. And as I'm thinking about this, my wife was in the back garden and she shouted, "Paul, come on." So I went outside and she's pointing up at the sky. And it looked just like car headlights, two circular, not together, one-to-one, both, nothing apparently joining them, but two headlights in the sky. And they were moving very slowly towards us. And we had two boys then, and the boys came out, and the four of us are watching, and they were moving slowly together, no sound, no anything, just two lights, moved over the top of us, and just as they got almost directly overhead, they suddenly, poof, like warp factor 10 was the first thing that went through my head. And it was like Star Trek, warp speed, Scotty, and off they went. And that's what it was like. And they must have been out of sight in seconds, gone. And it was like, wow, how can something move that fast, However, I then took the dog for a walk with my eyes mostly on the sky than the dog, and got back after 30 minutes or so, didn't see anything. As I'm getting back in the garden, going to get the brush to brush the dog, and I'm looking up, and they came back over in the opposite direction, still looking exactly the same, two lights, nothing apparently joining them, and throughout, no noise whatsoever. And they came back, and they just stayed very slowly in that position, just moving over until they went out of sight, and we couldn't see them in the distance anymore. Now, I'm reciting this to Philip Mantle after an abduction case we were investigating at the time. And he said, "I can tell you when that was, Paul." And I went, "Really?" And he said, "It was July 1984 because I saw them too." And it was like, "Really?" And it turned out he was leaving work, and the colleagues he worked with at the time used to give him some stick because they knew that he was into UFOs. And he said, "I used to get all sorts of grief from work, from his colleagues in the factory. But this night he was leaving," he says, "and as I'm leaving and driving out on the main road, there are these two lights in the sky, stationary." And he said, "Straight away I thought, that's all, they shouldn't be there." And he drove out, and there was a big flyover on one of the freeways near us. And there was a bus stop where there's a little lay-by where you could pull in. So he pulled in so that he could get a good view of it. And he said, and they didn't move. He says, and then eventually they just winked out and they weren't there anymore. Now, he went back to work the following day, and he says, my colleagues were all going, "Philip, did you see those lights? Did you see those lights?" But I just thought it was fabulous. And he actually said he was in the West Yorkshire UFO group at the time, and they said they did get a lot of reports from central England and Leeds, where Philip was, all the way over to the east coast. So they got quite a few reports where people had seen them. Now, I never reported it, and Philip didn't know anything about it that I knew until we'd quite by chance had this conversation.
Now, about how high would they have been? Any way to judge the height of these things?
Well, again, I would have said, see, this is a difficulty. When it's just a light, it could be a small object close, so it's only 1,000 feet high. I mean, the first one that I saw was with the bank of cloud. I would have said were level with the cloud, because as they moved, you could actually see the light from them shining on where the cloud sort of undulates on the edge. Yeah. You could see the light shining on it. So you knew they were the same level as the cloud. So they were maybe at 8,000 feet at the most, something like that. Okay. But these, because it was a relatively clear night, difficult to assess. But again, I would still say round about that height. I would say if you put an envelope between 5,000 and 10,000 feet, it was somewhere in that vicinity. But I didn't make a formal report or do any sort of formal measurements at the time.
Yeah, that would make sense if you were going to have people see it from a vast area. Yeah. That it was at a greater height, so you had more people a chance to see it in that area. Like what would have been basically right underneath where these things were. Is there a military or Air Force base close by?
No, nothing.
Okay. I was just curious because a lot of times they'll kind of be hovering around someplace. There may be nuclear weapons and.
Yeah, one thing that going back to my first sighting was the direction that they disappeared in was I was in the Air Valley. There was a lot of mining in the old days. There isn't anymore, but we had a lot of coal-fired power stations, and they went due east from us. Which, as the crow flies, there's a huge there was a huge coal-fired power station called Thorpe Marsh Power Station, and they went directly towards that. Now, whether that's just coincidence or not, I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
I personally think there's no such thing as coincidence. Everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, I think if they being those who aren't us, are going to be this low and be hovering around. It's not like a joyride. It's not like I've just got a new spaceship. Let's take it out for just a cruise around the block. There's an actual function and they're doing something. There's a plan. So keeping an eye on us.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that they're around us all the time, constantly. But just because they're on a different frequency, we can't see them. And it's only when they're moving through the frequencies that occasionally they'll pass through the visible spectrum that we see them. Only last week, just over a week ago, last Tuesday, my wife and I were in our garden, middle of the afternoon, brilliant weather, blue sky, not a cloud in sight. And in fact, the only thing you could see in the sky was the moon, which was about half, quite low down in the east. And as I'm sat, I made her a waterproof cover just to keep the garden swing out of the weather. And we sat on that, and it's got a roof on it that comes quite low down. So as I'm looking, I saw a really brilliant white pinpoint, and I mean tiny pinpoint of light. And straight away, it's like, what is that? And it got exceptionally bright. The magnitude was tremendous. And then it disappeared, faded away, nothing there. And then it came back again. So I'm shouting, hey, look at this, just a minute. So I lined it up level with the edge of the roof so I could see that it wasn't moving. So from our position, it was, we're about 5 miles south of the city of Leeds, and it was east-southeast from our position at about 50 degrees. 3:45 in the afternoon, and it kept appearing really bright and then diminishing and disappearing completely. We had it in sight for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, and it must have gone really bright and then faded away 10 times that I noticed. It was enough for my wife to get into my position so that she could see it. And I actually had time to go in and get a camera with a really good zoom on it, but the camera wouldn't take a picture of it. It was just blue sky. But we could see it, and then it went away and faded away one time and then never came back.
But you say the camera couldn't take a picture of it, or was it too far away, do you think? Or was it, what would be the reason it wasn't coming into the digital, or you couldn't get a digital picture?
It's like all things where you would get many instances of sightings, even from the military, where they'll pick things up on radar, but physically you can't see it. Or they'll pick it up and they're in the control tower looking out saying there's something over the airfield, but they can't see anything. Or by the same token, they can see something, but it's not being picked up on radar. And it's all to do with frequencies. And one of the things that I've said previously, trying to explain this, there was an instance in the US with the Gaffney incident, where there were 2 police officers, but there was also one with a young couple where they saw like a transparent UFO. And they said it was huge, disc-shaped, coming towards them. And they were in the car stopped, they're looking at it, and it solidified so that they could see a physical object as it came through towards them over some trees. Now, as it did that, as it came over the trees towards them, the trees and shrubbery around them caught fire. They panicking, didn't have a signal or anything. All the electrics had gone dead. The UFOs zoomed off. They then got a signal on the cell phone. They rang the emergency services. The fire came, put the fire out. Police came and just took a statement. By then, the UFO was long gone. But it's just a way of demonstrating that as they come down through the frequencies, next to our visible light that we see is infrared that generates heat. Now, I'm not saying this always happens. There was one that our good friend Malcolm Robinson from Scotland investigated, the Decmont Woods incident with Robert Taylor, the forestry worker. And initially he saw a transparent UFO. That also then became solid. And two balls dropped out the bottom with spikes on and rolled towards him. And that's the only, abduction scenario we're aware of in the UK at the moment, where the police were physically involved because they said there were physical evidence. So the police did investigate it. But this is just a way of, if you like, showing an example of how they use our little portion of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Have you ever lost any time in your own life? Have you ever lost 10 hours? And
right, this is another thing where I have, but not as I would say would be connected with UFOs. However, one of the things, if you imagine they're able to completely control the electromagnetic spectrum. So you now have a magnetic field, you as a person.
Yeah.
If we met in real life, we would know immediately whether we would get on or not, because your magnetic field reacts with my magnetic field. It's a completely subconscious thing. We can't control it. But you know, whenever you meet anybody for the first time, your subconscious knows if you're going to get on with that person. And it's because your magnetic fields react with each other. So you have a magnetic field where you are now, the chair you sat on, the computer in front of you, the room around you, even the building that you sat in. Everything has a magnetic field. And as Albert Einstein said, energy cannot be destroyed. It just goes from one thing to another. And it's around us all the time. And every thought that you have and the intention behind it is also an energy. So the reason I'm going into this is because if you imagine E.T. is master at controlling all this and manipulating it, they can see all this. They know, or if they wish, they know what you're thinking because they can understand it. That's why we often get, if you look at the abduction scenario where regression and things like that, where you get the Dolores Cannon, Bud Hopkins, Kath Marden more recently, and they all say the same thing. They all say that E.T., everything's done telepathically because it's done by thought. So you don't have any language barriers because it comes as a complete package. They don't need language because it's the thought, it's the intention. So that's immediately what you pick up. So it's automatically in your language and in your understanding. So there ain't any language barriers. And it's the same where one that I investigated with for BUFORA, where 4 adults that were abducted. This was back in 1995. And the guy said, Paul, he said, it was a strange atmosphere that evening. And he said, I wondered then, he said, I don't remember it normally. He said, it's like, he said, the only thing I can remember and recollect in a normal way is how it suddenly got dark. And I can remember thinking, why is it dark so quickly? And it's because they can control it. And he actually said, if you imagine your memory of it, how you would, although our memories tend to fill things in and you lose the detail over time. He said, if you imagine the memory as a VHS tape, the old videotape, and somebody cutting it up and throwing most of it away, but the bits that are together are not in the right order. And he says, and that's what it's like. He says, it's just not there for me to remember. He says, how you would be able to bring your memory back. He said, I can't. There's nothing there. And that's difficult, I would think, from an investigator's point of view, not to have some empathy, if you like, with these peoples that are, they're experiencing these weird and bizarre and something they haven't asked for, they don't understand, they're completely out of the depth with it. And it is very difficult,
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. I've run into a number of those people because I would go all around to the UFO conferences in Pasadena, Los Angeles, over in Arizona and Phoenix.
Yeah.
And I go with a psychic who does the regression therapies on them. And they'll pull back the memory within those hours. And it's fascinating to listen to you talk about the way you've understood, the energy of meeting somebody and kind of knowing automatically.
Yeah.
A lot of the people I talk to on my show are psychics and in the metaphysical realm where we talk about higher vibration and lower vibration people.
Yeah.
And
just the same.
It's just, semantics. It's just, you're describing exactly what they say. You walk up to somebody and if you're, I hate now it's been a watered down term, but empath, if you're a higher vibration person and you meet another higher vibration person, it's like you've known them all your life.
Yeah.
And when you meet that lower vibration person, it's either you have this desire to try to fix them or you just are that's a person I'd rather not be around.
Yeah.
And
I think that's why people, I'm not saying just the paranormal fraternity, but people tend to stick with like-minded people because you're vibrating you have the same vibrational level, and that's how you get groups that come together. I was very fortunate when I was with BUFORA on one occasion at a conference with Bud Hopkins, and he was saying how that works, and from a spiritual side of things, because he didn't consider himself he didn't even want to get involved in the UFO thing to start with. I was very fortunate that I had lunch with him, and he said, Paul, I'm more interested in UFOs. He says, I was an artist, and he got into the hypnotic regression side of things, more on the counseling side of things, as you said, as an empath to try and help people. And he said, when you've done so many of them, and he says, and these people were coming from all walks of life and from all different geographical locations, and they're all telling you nearly identical stories. He says, they didn't know each other. They didn't know that I knew these others. And he said, and they're telling me the same thing. He said, that convinced me that there's obviously more to it, that they are telling me the truth, that there is something behind it,
Yeah, it's that connection and why certain people like you get a message. You get that, oh crap, he can see us kind of message. Like, why all of a sudden are you being able to receive that when the person standing beside you isn't? Yeah. And it all comes down to your vibration. Yeah.
There's an instance where at the time when we moved to that new home when I was a child, we moved within about 100 yards of a spiritualist church. Now, my father had some work colleagues that went to the church. So as children, you do as you're told. But growing up in your teenage years, as we're all aware, part of growing up, you're into, as we will be into girls, we're into motorcycles, cars, having a drink, and church goes to the bottom of the list. That is part of growing up. It's normal. And I was one day going out to meet my friends, and we had to walk past the church. And I'm walking past one day, and there's this old guy. I didn't go to church then. And I'm walking past, and there's this old guy stood outside having a cigarette in a three-piece suit. And I didn't know him. Now, all I could think was he knew me through my parents. Now, having said that, even my parents didn't know, because as teenagers, as we all were, you tend to move away from your parents and you try and live your own life and do, have your own circle of friends. And I was really, really into UFOs and reading as many books as I could. I must have read hundreds and hundreds. But my parents didn't know that. They weren't aware of that. And this guy, I'm walking past the church, And he's outside smoking a cigarette. And he just said, Paul, have you got a minute? And I'm like, how did he even know my name? You know, I don't know him. So I'm assuming he knew my parents. So I didn't say anything, but I walked up to him and he went, just a minute. And he got this out of his pocket. He got this scrappy piece of paper, like an old envelope or something, and a pen. And he wrote something down and then he showed me. And it just said the 3 letters on it, UFO. And I don't believe I'd even opened my mouth and spoken or said anything. And he just said, I've been told by Spirit to tell you you're thinking along the right lines. And that was it. And I was like blown away. You know, it's like, how did he know that? My parents wouldn't even know. You know, it's like,
yeah.
And for Spirit to tell you that, and it was like, yeah. So there are things, you steered in certain directions, I think, in your life, and everything happens for a reason. And I think that was one of those, dare I say, a kick up the bum to get me moving in the right direction and to keep my interest and keep me moving, you know?
Yeah, I wonder if there was something that over and above the book that you've written, again, UFOs is a real story, and you can get that on Amazon. And if there's something that is coming still, and you're speaking at different conferences and literally throwing seeds out to people, and some will germinate and some won't. And when those ones that germinate, now they're on their own path and they're having some kind of understanding. So if for someone when you were a teen to point out that Spirit says you're on the right path, well, yeah, that's a interesting path, but to be on a ufology kind of path, there has to be, again, like we said, when you actually see these things, there has to be a reason. Like it's in the greater good. It's something going on in the greater good that you were doing. And whether or not you were talking to somebody or someone reads your book and has an aha moment, you know, maybe you could literally spend all that blood, sweat, and tears on a book, put your soul into it for years, publish it, and the only purpose that was supposed to be in the universe is to get one person's attention.
I agree.
So who knows? You know, who knows what exactly it is? And it's funny that we have to live like that. Like it's all of, where am I going? What is exactly the plan here? I'd like to know it, and then I could probably help you, the universe, along with my plan. And the universe is going, yeah, you don't have the technology to do, you don't have the skill set, or you'll be scared to do that. So we're just going to help you along here a little bit. Does your mother side of the family, did they also have this kind of thing where they're more of the...
I'm the only one.
Intuitive? Oh, so you're the bounced out, you're the intuitive in the family?
Yeah. None of them were psychic. None of them. My mum and dad are no longer with us, but my brothers and sisters the same. And I actually spoke to my brother about that first sighting only maybe a month ago, and I asked him his recollections of it, and his was just sort of the nuts and bolts and seeing it very. But he says it's very vague. He said, I can't remember that much about it, and he certainly didn't hear anything. Yeah. And to go on, as you've just said, your purpose, and being an empath, and for reasons, to go on with the analogy of the record or the stack of records, right? We'll go back to that.
Yeah.
Imagine, if you will, that the edge of the record is evil. We'll just say evil for now, okay?
Yeah.
And the center of the record, where you put it over the spike in the center of the record is purity, or what some people would call God, right? Now, the grooves in the record are all separate, and we are somewhere on our record, in our ordinary matter, on one of those grooves, by our own effort right now, and our own thought processes right now. So it's your ethics and your morals, how you help people and all the rest of it, that helps you to progress towards the center, right? That's in a nutshell. Now, you imagine, if you knew why you were here, that wouldn't work. You've got to do it by the thought process you have right now and how you conduct yourself. So, to me, one of the things that I've conjectured is that this is like a universal, if you like. ET are on their own record, in their own groove, and they're on exactly the same learning curve as we are. So they also, by their own effort, have to get to the centre. Just because the 10 records in the stack higher up than us are completely in control of the electromagnetic spectrum is irrelevant. They still have this moral and ethics and things they have to learn by. Technology don't come into it. It's the way that we conduct our lives. And that's why whatever religion you are, religion don't come into it. Religion's man-made. God didn't write anything down. Man did. So it don't make any difference if you are Christian, if you are Muslim, Buddhist, Mormon, Jewish. None of them. It don't make any difference because it's the same when we know that you get good and bad in all religions, but it's the same distance to the centre for everybody. So religion doesn't come into it. And when you say, well, I prayed 5 times a day or I attended Bible classes, don't matter. I gave all my salary to the church, don't matter. It's the intention behind it and the thought processes behind it and the way that you live your life. That's the bit that matters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very well said. That's good.
Yeah.
There's some of us are on the 78 RPM records and some are on the 45s. Their paths are a little bit shorter. And the thing is, I just don't want to get to the end right now. I'd rather, yes, I'd like to get purity I'm having a good time on the path, the traveling portion here, the finding new things and talking to people about their experiences and stuff.
Being aware of it is a good thing.
Well, and that's that is one of the biggest things is being aware of it. I wasn't as a kid, I was, I'm fascinated by UFOs and I read Chariots of the Gods, I'm dyslexic, so I don't read. Like if I read a book, it's going to be nonfiction and there's going to be some pictures in it. So it's like, I'll flip through it. But if I actually had to read something like reading fiction, if I have to read the same sentence 2 or 3 times because I've mixed up a word, I just put the book down and walk away. But I will devour ufology and some of the ghost kind of books, but the nonfiction ones, not the fiction ones. And, if there's a diagram, fine, because I'm that kind of left brain kid that I need something. I need to look at a picture so I can deal with that. But I didn't. All the woo-woo stuff never really clicked until 2012, and I actually saw a psychic who pointed out a bunch of stuff in my life that no one else would know, like your fellow with the UFO thing and knowing your name and all that. But I'm looking at her like, wow, okay, this is the most bizarre conversation I've ever had with somebody. And an hour later, she's got me on a paranormal team. And it was incredible, but totally that 1 hour, which moved on to many hours with this person, it reflecting back on my life. I went, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that's what happened there. Oh, this is why that happened. And it said that, aha, this is making way more sense now. And it's there's so many people that just go through life, and I think their aha moment is like on their last breath. When they look up and go, hey, who are you people? What are you doing here? Why are my great grandparents hanging out over top of my bed? But yeah, it's kind of interesting to have it while you still have both feet on the ground, as it were. It's interesting that your family isn't involved in this. A lot of times we'll get people who have that higher vibration, and it's hereditary. It's like your mother's side of the family, your father's side, your grandmother, used to see things, and it's interesting. Or they just never told you. It was one of those, your grandmother had all sorts of woo-woo stuff going on, but she's like, yeah, okay, that's something we don't talk about, Granny, and that's a family secret, but it's interesting. Do you get communications or do you get thoughts on a weekly, monthly, daily kind of thing, or is it an important milestones of your life, or in traveling to a specific place that you've never been before? How do you get these, or do you recall?
I know what you mean. I think to me it's just a sporadic thing. When you need to know, then you'll know. Then they'll point you in the right direction. I mean, there's all sorts of things that have, I don't know, come to me. You see, like downloads.
Yeah,
I think you get this when you're ready for it. One of the things, the question that I was asked was on the Rendlesham Forest thing, and they said when he put his hand onto the UFO, onto the craft, he got a download effect. He got feedback from it, and I said, of course he will, because it's connected to whoever is inside. Now, I'll just go on to this then. This is all developed over time, obviously. Yeah. But I think this, when you're researching things, I believe that you get these stumbling blocks and you will get clarification when you're ready. And I think different things have sort of come to me at different times. Now, one of the things, we're on about the infrared spectrum and how things burst into flames on one of the things, and moving into our visible spectrum so people could actually see something. And I think it's the same with these specific geographical areas that are all over the world, where you have this the magnetic field and the records are closer together, so you can get this overlap where people do more easily experience things. Now, where we're on about the going through the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum, one of the things I want to go on to that we, as investigators, you get a lot of, is an abductee will often say there was absolute silence. There wasn't, and when I say silence, it was absolute. There was no hum of traffic in the background, or no wind, or birds in the trees, or anything. It was nothing. And that's because they're being tuned out of where our normal acoustic spectrum would be. So they're not in their normal frequency.
Oh, okay.
And also, going on from that, that is why I believe people often get this, dare I say, visceral terror. It's being absolutely frightened and being afraid of the paranormal. And we've even had a lot of instances of it from Bigfoot and from Sasquatch, where people have been absolutely terrified. And it's the same with abduction scenario on UFOs. And where on a chemical level we would get the fight or flight syndrome on a confrontation in the normal physical reality, I think we have, our subconscious will know when we are not where we're supposed to be. And if you think about it, when you're entering another vibration where that could be paranormal or could be ufological, it's irrelevant. It's still a different vibration. So your subconscious, your soul, if you like, knows it shouldn't be where it is. It shouldn't be experiencing that. And that may be, to some extent, where people get this terror and this fright from. And it's because the subconscious knows, and it's just a survival instinct from your subconscious that says, you shouldn't be where you are, type of thing, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's like your body alarm going off.
Yeah.
Something primal, really.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. There is I was a policeman for many, many years, and I've been around dead humans who have been dead for some time. and there's a smell, and it's a very unique smell.
Yeah.
And when you smell it, you know you're not like you'll walk into a house where someone had passed away of natural causes down the hall to the right. When you open the door to actually walk down the hall and go to the right is a chore, because your body is telling you, and it's a primal monkey brain thing that your body's saying, one of our kind have died in this residence. So it could be dangerous, because if he's dead or she's dead, excuse me, you have a greater chance of dying, even though they've died of natural causes. But those alarms, and the first time I went through that, you get, it's, you describe it as anxious. There's this like, you start tingling, and it's like, and you've actually got to force yourself to walk through it. But once you've smelled it and you've done it, then you can get over it the next time. But that first time is like, why am I not walking in? It wasn't the call didn't come through. It wasn't the kind of the Americanized, my God, there was a shooting, please come to the house. It was, I haven't heard from Granddad for the last 3 weeks. Could you go check on him? It wasn't a horrible, horrible thing. You kind of build it psychologically up as you walk up to the door. And in some cases, seeing flies on the inside of the window, which is a whole other issue. But then going, that's why we haven't seen grandfather for a while. Yeah. He was 90 years old, and it was expected. But it was the actual smell that triggered that thing in your head to go, oh, you can't go in there. That's kind of weird. And then consciously having to fight your way through it just to walk down the hall. Yeah. So, I can see how an influence to that part of your brain, and to being influenced by like a multi-dimensional thing when you're not supposed to, we aren't supposed to be in that dimension, or we're not supposed to be experiencing that vibration, and your body says, you can't really go here. We got to go. We got to run. It's fight or flight. Yeah. And then the anxiety comes. Why am I getting, or in like you say in the Bigfoot thing, or Sasquatch, people will report that the Sasquatch created fear, and they've never been that frightened of anything. So it was like the fear was projected on them. And it wasn't, I think, consciously projected by the being. I think it was just, that is the way we receive it as that vibration. Yeah.
Going on, I'll move on with that, because there are different things with the vibration and the electromagnetic spectrum. And that is, I believe, one manifestation of it that we physically feel. And there are other things. If you we'll go back to the abduction scenario. If you're able to completely control the electromagnetic spectrum, one of the things that you can do is tune somebody out. How many times do we hear of abductees that were floated out through the ceiling, or floated out through the wall, or even through a closed door? Yeah. And it's because they're not where they should be. They've tuned that frequency out of it. So it's irrelevant. It don't matter what's in the way. And it don't matter if they're in the middle of the country or on a 15-story apartment. At the end of the day, because ET can control it completely and they understand it completely, it's irrelevant where they are and irrelevant where you are. If they've come for you, they will take you, you don't have a choice in it. And you get a lot of people that say, I don't understand how this happens. And that's very basically, it's just controlling the electromagnetic spectrum, end of. And it's that simple. And you do get a lot of the same with the movement of UFOs. This is one that really makes me laugh. When you get these people on the television and they get these, whatever, that come in, alleged scientists and professionals and professors that say there were no heat plume, there was no flight surfaces, there were, no this, that, and the other. And we'll take the Nimitz encounter more recently that came out, where it was under the surface of the water and it suddenly went to 50,000 feet in the blink of an eye, And it's totally irrelevant. That's our physics that we're putting onto their technology. They don't use our physics at all. And as going back to what Bud Hopkins and Dolores Cannon and Kath Martin and others have said, they always say it's controlled by thought. So that's why there's no. Well, the other thing that the abductees say, there's no steering wheel inside these craft because everything's done with the mind. Therefore, they don't have and don't need the control mechanisms that we need. That's our physics and how we move our vehicles. And it's the same with speed. It's the same with maneuverability. They're in their own little piece of the universe, their own little electromagnetic field. So it's irrelevant. So that's why they can move through space. They can move through our normal atmosphere. They can move through our lakes and oceans. It's irrelevant. And it's same with if you see them and they'll say, well, if we'd have done that, we'd have been splattered across the side of the vehicle, you know. Mm-hmm. It's to them, they're not moving. It's only what we perceive. The 10,000 miles an hour don't mean anything to them. It's all thought. It's instant. So it's just what we perceive of them moving. They're not moving at all. To them, if they want to be there, it's like where you are now. If you wanted to go to Vancouver Island, you're at Vancouver Island. End of story. You don't have to go and get in your car and steer and do all the rest of it because it's done by thought. They're there instantly. So again, we're trying to project our physics on what we understand of it onto their technology, which is ridiculous. It makes me laugh. It's like, don't even bother going there. You know, when you think about it that way.
I've always thought it would be like if you're sitting in a pod and you're like, we'll say out in our universe here, and you think of something, everything around you moves. And you stay, you're still, and everything outside moves. Yeah. Like, so you're in the UK in your pod, and you think, well, I want to go to Fiji. Well, then the Earth moves around you, but you stay still. Yeah. So there is no shucking back and forth, and there's no G-force on you. It's everything else around you is moving, but you were staying still. And the organic side of things, a lot of people, or a lot of UFO researchers say, well, some of the UFOs they believe are organic and actually connected to the individual flying it. And
yeah, absolutely.
Which would make sense in the Rendlesham Forest scenario where the fellow putting his hand on the side of the craft gets a download because the craft is connected to the guy inside.
Absolutely.
So that energy is coming through the craft to him.
Yeah. The one occasion that happened, I was with, before my days that I was married, and I was with a young lady. And we were teenagers and we were parked up at the beach, and she'd got a new car. This young lady, quite well off, parents had got her a new car. We drove to the beach in a new car, showing off with her, and I started narrating more naively and not as developed as it is now, but it was still the real story. And we were going back to meet friends, and she wanted to go. And the car was completely dead, flat, nothing. No lights would light or nothing. And it was like I got this download that they wanted me to finish narrating my whatever I was saying at the time so that she could understand it. So I said, don't worry about it. I'll just carry on. And when we'd finished, the car just started normally, and she never had a problem with it before and never had a problem with it since. And I believe that you do get a lot of that electromagnetic interference, if you like, in our lives when they deem it necessary.
And here I thought it was a British Leyland car and was really bad Lucid wiring. So.
Yeah, probably.
It was a TR6. It's not going to start. Yeah, and then it went.
Oh, yeah.
But when you said it ran perfect after that, no, it couldn't have been. It's why I always come back to this, like, why you? Or why this guy? Or what was it? What seed did you have to plant in that woman's head? What was it necessary for you to relay to that person at that time in that person's life.
Yeah.
And whatever came of it. And she went off and lived her life, or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Where did that ever go?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think we're all given these little nuggets of information or little nudges in the right direction as and when. And I don't think we have any say in it. It happens when it needs to happen. And when you're ready to move on and move in that new direction, you will be nudged by whatever means necessary in that direction.
Yeah, and it's almost like planting. Like I have a garden that's I planted a bunch of kind of their butterfly peas, and I've got one sprouted out of 19 I planted. So you're the ET, and you're out there saying, "Okay, we got a bunch of information we have to pass on. I've got 5,000 people who have a higher vibration. I'm going to influence all of them with this information." But how many of those actually blossom? So instead of coming to an individual saying, I'm giving you this information to take on and share with the world, they cover their galactic asses by firing that out to a few thousand, and hopefully eventually one or two of them may actually pass that message on. In your case, you've written a book on it. Again, you're passing the seeds. You're hopefully going to influence somebody to maybe flip that switch in themselves and realize that, okay, all that stuff I saw when I was a kid, okay, I'm not crazy because other people see it too.
Yeah. There are a lot of things like that, and I agree with what you're saying. And it's like people will move on when they're ready to move on. And again, going back to ET, I agree that it could be a thing where you're allowed to remember. Well, definitely, people will remember what they're allowed to remember. I mean, how many times do we hear of abductees that said I can remember a vehicle at the side of the road, or owls. Owls is another good one. I mean, Calvin Parker even, that did the on the Pascagoula incident, he only naturally remembered the one incident with Charlie Hickson, and he remembered that quite naturally. But more recently, when Kath Marden used hypnotic regression, he'd actually had 4. Yep. It was the third one of 4. Yep. So that makes you wonder, why was he only allowed to remember that one? You know, is it something, is it a bizarre act of kindness on ET's part? Because as I've said previously, I think there are a lot of races and ET are at different levels of learning. So you're going to get good and bad and different ways of teaching and different ways of people experiencing things. So in some ways, the abductees that don't recall things, that don't remember, is it a bizarre act of kindness on ET's part that we don't remember? Are we the sort of, if you had, I mean, from where you are, where there's a lot of nature, and we would go into one area and say, put nets up and look at the birds, see what sort of species we've got, see that they've got a good weight, that they're living normally, they're getting the food that they need. Is that a bizarre way, really? Is that what they're doing to us, just keeping an eye on us, seeing how we develop, but not letting us remember things that are too traumatic, even though there are occasions that they do, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I was to try as an advanced society or advanced civilization or being, have to come down here and try to influence what the heck us monkey brains are doing, or us humans are doing, it would be a little bit stressful to have to deal with us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is we get all the, like, here's a fellow, Craig Campobasso, the Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, 84 different species of ETs. Wow. And not all of them are all, you know, friendly. And so it comes down to it, too, is like, and Paul, what do you think about these things coming in and wanting to influence us? And are we being influenced by one group positively and 3 groups negatively, or is one group wanting to figure out how we do things and another group are trying to keep us from dealing with that group? We are a zoo. A zoo planet. We are a planet where all these other things come and go, okay, what the heck are you guys doing? And what are you doing to this planet? You're screwing it up. And the whole, and we get into the interdimensional thing. We share this planet. We share the energy of this solar body. And you guys who live on the crust here are really screwing it up.
Yeah.
So
I agree completely. Yeah.
You've got to influence it this way, and there might be a bunch of other beings saying, "Let them screw it up because we'll take it over."
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think that is happening. And again, I personally don't know how you can say one way or the other how many are a good influence and how many are a bad influence. Now, one of the things that I've always said, from me being normally able to recollect, when I was a child, much younger, before I had the UFO sighting, I had a lot of, I won't say missing time, but a lot of, you could interpret as night terrors as a child.
Yeah.
Where I was taken away, things were done, and I was terrified. I mean, at one stage, I wouldn't even go to bed. I was that scared that I knew they were going to come and take me away again. However, when that first voice in my head that I can clearly recollect that said we shouldn't have come out the cloud, I got that as a friendly voice. And there was another time when I worked in the medical centre. I've always been in the medical field all my life. And I was a qualified nurse in hospital. Then I went to be occupational health nurse. And I start at some bizarre times, like 5 o'clock in the morning on some shifts, or finish then. So I'd be travelling very early hours of the morning, and sometimes 25 miles, and sometimes I'd be the only vehicle on the road. But the reason I'm telling you this is often I would see lights, unexplained lights in the sky. And over a period of about 6 months that I was out in the very early hours, I would have conversations with them. And it was almost like they were friendly and they were allowing me to see that they were there, even though I wasn't involved, if you like. But I always got the feeling, it was a vibration, if you like, that they were friendly. Now, why? I don't know.
It's I interviewed a lady, an artist, Akani Krameric, and who's a genius in oil painting. From the age of like 5 or 8 years older. And she had talked about having dreams where she would go up with her quote unquote light family, and she was taken into space. And I think I scared her parents because I interviewed her, and I think I'm the only one who said, "Have you ever lost any time?" And she said, "Yeah, I lost 10 hours once." And the FBI and police were called, and they were in the house when I came out of my bedroom, and I said, "Whoa, okay, so that's like basically what other people describe as an abduction." Oh, no, it wouldn't have been an abduction. But I was up in space with my light family. And he's like, "Well, yeah, you weren't in your bedroom. The police were there. They looked. You weren't there, and you walked out of the door." So,
yeah.
And she was, "Oh, yeah, I guess you're right." Yeah. Probably, she was always being interviewed by these religious programs because she painted a picture of Jesus, and it was very well known. But I was the first dummy to ask her about alien abductions, and it's like, don't get talk about that. Yeah, it's interesting, and I like the idea of you being communicated with. Your first 2 coming out of the clouds is like more of a friendly thing. Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, it's only Paul. Whew. It's all right.
I mean, well, one thing, going back to what you've just been saying about that lady, I've had quite vivid dreams often. And we all dream, and I was dreaming that I was flying. Now, this to me was real. And I can remember being very, what can I say, very down afterwards when I came out and I woke up normally. Because
really?
Because I was flying. Now, whether it was just my astral body or whatever, I don't know. But I could see, going back to it, the whole of the electromagnetic spectrum. And I can remember flying over a group of people, and a lady had fallen and she'd hurt herself, but you could see the hurt, you could see what was wrong. And by being able to, by understanding it, you could tune it and just put it back so that in effect you were healing it because you was putting it back to its normal vibration.
Yep.
Now you could you could feel it and you could see the colour of it, and you were able to assess it, if you like, and deal with it, and then just move on to something else. And now we're flying off somewhere else. And I can remember how when I woke up and I realised I'd been asleep, and it was so profound and it was so much of a downer that how can I be that perfect and that good? And then suddenly it's taken away, but I was allowed to remember it. And I think there are a lot of instances like that happen to people where you're just given these little nuggets of information. And I mean, I can still remember that now.
Yeah,
very clearly.
It's funny you should say that you had the ability, or you had the dream. You were flying, you were kind of doing the astral thing, and then you saw the energy and you're healing through energy. I've always said, and this is a UFO interview right now, but the metaphysical side of things and the empath and the intuitive side, when I talk to those people on my show, we often comment that an empath, their career choices are literally maids, butlers, bartenders, waitresses, chefs, nurses, doctors, medical. It's all helping. It's all the helping professions. That they're no good sitting in a cubicle somewhere. You are always drawn to a profession where you are helping someone else feel good. You're fixing something, but an other person, not yourself. And it's interesting you put that. Now you have this dream. One of the other things we talk about is that's a lucid dream. Knowing that you're dreaming while you're dreaming is the dictionary definition of a lucid dream. Only higher vibration people dream like that. Only higher vibration know they're dreaming when they're dreaming.
Yeah.
And so you overlap that. But when you've actually been taken, no, I shouldn't say taken. When you have relaxed to that point and your soul energy, your essence goes off and does its thing, you are actually in a healing mode. You are shown healing.
Yeah.
And the frustrating part about that is that you're a healer on this plane, and you actually were given an idea of this is how the best way to heal. Yeah. And the frustrating part is you couldn't bring that back because you know how important that is to our species to heal. And as an empath, you are a healer and you want to fix that. It's a very fascinating thing. And being that you're the only known person in your family like this, it begs the question, where are you from?
Yeah. Well, may I narrate another little story?
Yes, please.
I was a teenager again, walking past the church, and they were all coming out of the spiritualist church, and my parents were there. My father said, "Betty wants to speak to you." So it was like, "Okay, who's Betty?" And she turned out to be this old medium, and she said, "I want you to go and see Pearl." This other old, I mean, to me as a teenager, they're all just old ladies, So it was like, okay, now it just happened that I knew this Pearl because she had a gorgeous daughter. So as a teenager, it gives you some incentive to go and see her. So it's like, oh, yeah, okay, then I'll go and see Pearl. So she said, "I just want you to go and see her." Now, you just, as you did when you're a Victorian upbringing, you do as you're told. So as a young kid, I got on using local transport, and she only lived a few villages away, maybe 10 minutes in a bus. Got on my local bus, gets off, knocked on the door, and I'm thinking, great, I'll see the daughter, say hello. And she was in the house on her own. Daughter had gone to grandparents, and the whole of the house is in darkness. All the curtains are closed. And it turned out this lady suffered really debilitating migraines. And I went, and she was a medium at the church. Now, I didn't know that, but anyway, I knocked on the door. She opened the door, said, "Come in." And I followed her in, closed the door behind me, and she walked into this big, quite a large old house, and in a big lounge, and there was just a high chair in the middle, a bit like a dining carver in the middle of the room. I followed her into this lounge, and I swear it was just like somebody else took over my body. This lady sat down on the chair in front with her back to me, and I walked up to the back of her, and she said a prayer. I never said anything. I put my hands on her shoulders, and then it was like somebody took control of me. And I was stood behind her in this bizarre position with one hand, my right hand up to the sky, to the ceiling, and my left hand on just above the top of her head. And I'm stood in this position. I hadn't said anything. And then I physically felt this power come from somewhere through my hands, out through my left hand and into the top of this pearl's head. And I physically felt it for about a minute, and then it just switched off. And I knew it had finished. That was it. And I put my hands down, put my hands back on the shoulder, and she sort of just stood up and turned round towards me, and she said, "May, you hide your light under a bushel." And it was like, I didn't even know, as a teenager, I didn't even know what that meant, you know. So she jumped up, opened the curtains, put the kettle on, and 10 minutes later, I'm walking out thinking, what the heck just happened? You know, I've no idea. And it was, again, it was just, to me, an experience that I was shown psychic healing, if you like, and the power that, how it can work and how it does work. And I'd never done it before, and I've never done it since. And it's like, why did that happen then, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting not ever having to do it since, because, you know, we now understand, you know, people take Reiki courses and do energy work and things like that. I go to I screwed up my back in a car accident 20 some years ago, and it always hurts. I can go to physio and it's good for a week. I can go to this energy person who does the woo-woo over top of me, and I'm good for 3 months. You know, and it's not a psychological injury. It's like friggin' lower back pain, and it hurts. And nope, she does her thing, and 3 months will go by, and I won't even feel a twinge. It's amazing. It'd be interesting to see as you kind of developed. Are you working still, or are you retired?
No, I'm retired now.
Okay,
I retired 18 months ago.
If you got off and took a Reiki class course, and even if you only worked on, like I took it, I only work on my dog, because I actually did it to a friend of mine who was actually another policeman, and I didn't know she had a bad knee, and she said, "Okay, go see if you can find something." And I did all the woo-woo stuff before the Reiki. I started seeing dead people around her, and I went, "Yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore." It's like, yeah, I think your knee hurts and you've got a pain here, and who the hell's that? It's like, okay, I think I'll just work on my dog's bad knee. But it's interesting. There's hospitals just in Washington State here where they don't say this out loud because it's against all sorts of bizarre policies. But when you come off of anesthetic and you come out of surgery and you're coming out of the anesthetic, they do energy raking. The nurses will go like this over top of the person and they're imagining pulling the anesthetic out of their system, and they find that they come out of anesthetic quicker and without that hangover.
Yeah, that's good.
So it clears them out of the waiting or this holding area between going back to the bed and the monitoring area after surgery. The nurses are doing this, and they're actually pulling. They're meditating and pulling what they believe is this other energy out. But imagine if you actually said that out loud, and they identified which hospital the nurses were doing that. You know, you have people going in there with a very strict religious belief, not wanting voodoo happening to them while they're unconscious. So Yeah, they probably get into a lot of trouble, especially in the U.S. where they sue everybody for anything. But it's found it works. It clears them out of the that holding area a lot quicker, like half the time, and the people are recovering from the anesthetic without that hangover and groggy feeling.
Excellent.
So it works. It does do its thing. Your energy work, which I say your energy work because that's what you did. Even if you were to go in hindsight back through your career, now understanding that you have this kind of woo-woo stuff going on and you have a connection to other energies around you. If you were to go back, I wonder if in hindsight, if you could find places in your career where you've were driving and you turned left instead of right, and you turned left, but it was a mistake. But if you had turned right, the bridge was out, that kind of thing. You were kept from getting into physical harm.
Yeah.
Ring true with anything? You were in the military too, so I don't know. Were you ever deployed in the military, or were you lucky enough to be between conflicts?
Well, I was deployed, but I was stationed in Berlin in the Cold War. That was an experience. Northern Ireland. But again, it's something that may have happened to a lot of people and they're not necessarily aware of it. And these things happen all the time where you just nudged in the right direction. And I think these happen. It's like I've always been, when I was in the army, I was a nurse, then an occupational health nurse. I was a medic in the army, and then a paramedic for 28 years. So you're always dealing with people. So how many times in all that time was I in the right place at the right time, or,
Yeah, was somebody guided to you at a specific point in their life, or their injury, or their in their mental well-being, especially in a military situation or a high-stress situation. They're guided to somebody who they could dump into. They could just vent, and you would take that and deal with it, and they'd move on. And again, it's like it's like your spirit guides. I always describe to people like the railings on a little kid's bowling lane, where you pop those up, you take your kid bowling. The guides are like the ball bounces down. A lot of people, their ball goes straight down the lane to the end. That's their life. But like me, I'm like bouncing off railing to railing, and my guides are doing this. And that's literally in your life as a human being in this lifetime, dealing with the trauma that is brought to you. You're kind of going subconsciously bouncing them into different views or different places, and helping relieve whatever stresses they have. Now, your book itself, The UFOs, The Real Story, again, that's another little nudge for the people who read it.
Yeah. Well, there you go, because it's obviously available as a paperback or as an ebook, but it's also available as an audiobook, James. So there you go. That gets scary. You're going to put it on your cell phone, you listen to it as you fall asleep, and then dream that you're off there flying around the universe. Be kind of fun. And you don't have a website up yet, or you don't have a website yet, but you have all this is at your Facebook, and it's called It's the Real Story on Facebook. So if anyone's out there on the Facebook, It's the Real Story without the little apostrophe. Thank you. I lost the word. I was going to say the upper comma. It's the Real Story on Facebook. That's kind of cool. If you bounced in and wanted to see Paul and ask him any questions, and sure.
he's retired now, so he's got lots of time to answer them.
I would like to think so.
You would like to think so. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's good. Are you planning on doing any other writing now that you've got that out of the way, or is that just one of those things to say, I was off my desk now, I can walk away?
Well, no, I think for me, it was getting the idea of just sort of the whole picture out there for people to nudge them in the right direction, and hopefully give people the nudge to go off and read something that interested them. Because as we all know, some may be interested on the paranormal side, some interested on the UFO side, or whatever, whatever comes your way and whatever you resonate with, go with it.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm getting the book, and I will get the book. I won't get the audio. Do you have any photographs in there?
I do have a few in there, yeah.
Okay.
Now,
cool.
I tend to put my pictures on the Facebook page, on the Insta reel, because I go sky watching, and I've got a few photographs, and I've got one that's about an 18-second video of a UFO I took one night in the early hours of the morning. So what I tend to do is put it on and then give the background to it and any technical information if people want that,
Perfect. Do you ever come over to the Americas at all?
All the time when they let me.
When they let you
At the moment, with this ridiculous thing going on, but I'm hoping by this time next year, James, will be back to normal. Let's see.
Yeah, we'll see when the apocalypse is over. Definitely go up to Sedona. Go up there and meet Melinda Leslie, who takes people on UFO tours. Sure. And with the night vision, they're just flying in groups all over the place up there. It's bizarre. Yeah. That's the first time I've actually gone, okay, there's UFOs. Yeah. I'm looking at them now and firing a little handheld laser at them and making them 10 times brighter than they dim down. And it's like, oh, my God. So, come visit. Not that you don't have UFOs where you are, obviously. It's a bit of a UFO hotspot. Paul Ascough, thank you very much for dropping by.
What can I say, James? Thank you for having me, and I hope it's been good for some people, nudge them in the right direction.
I think it will be. Cheers, man.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much, James.
That's it. Let's roll. Hey. Let's be careful out there.